curate your environment. Put things around you that make you happy. You have a responsibility to awe and beauty. Make sure that you experience those things in your life. Without it, the world is going to pull the right side of your negative fight, flight, sympathetic nervous system down into a rabbit hole. You gotta intentionally balance it out. And empathetic leadership is not an oxymoron.
Welcome to the Thought Leader Revolution with Nikki Ballou. Join the revolution. There's never been a better time in history to speak your truth, find your freedom, and make your fortune. Each week, we interview the world's top thought leaders and learn the secrets of how they built a 6 to 7 figure practice. This episode has been brought to you by eCircleacademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. I'm your host, Nikki Ballou. And boy, do we have an exciting guest lined up for you today. Today's guest was recommended to me by a dear friend. And he said, you gotta have this man on. He's amazing. He is someone with a background as an attorney, but don't hold that against him, because what he's gonna talk about is something far cooler, and that's the power of meditation. In fact, today's episode is called Demystifying Meditation, and I am speaking about the one, the only, the legendary Bob Martin. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Yeah, happy to be here. What an introduction. Boy, I'm excited.
Excited to have you here. So, Bob, tell us your backstory. How'd you get to be the great Bob Martin?
Well, I mean, it's 75 years worth of backstory, so it could go on and on forever, but let me give you the Reader's Digest version, all right? I grew up in amusement parks. My folks were in the popcorn cotton candy business. And it was my father's great sadness when I decided I would become an attorney, but I did. And it was through a very odd set of circumstances, but that's a whole nother story. Anyway, I was in the 70s. We're talking about the 70s, give you a time frame, and this was Miami, the cocaine cowboy days. These are the days of Scarface and Miami Vice and all that stuff. And I worked for Janet Reno in the DA's office there.
Sure. Remember her?
Yeah, she eventually was the Attorney General in the Clinton administration.
Yeah, that's right.
And she was a piece of work. Let me tell you, she was great. But I got to try 2 felony trials while I was a third-year law student, and proceeded through the office, got up to economic crimes and consumer frauds, and we hit the cartels and the mob in Miami at that time for about $72 million.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I went out into private practice after that, and I'll call him Johnny, who was part of the Italian wing of the conglomerate, which included the Italians and the Colombians and the Peruvians and the Cubans and the Haitians. They all kind of talked to each other at that level. And he came to see me, and he basically said, you got to be pretty good to beat our lawyers, because we got good lawyers. And I want to send you some clients. So I started down the road, and I guess I became a mob lawyer. And I'm hanging around with these guys and doing this stuff, and maybe doing a little too much stuff, if you catch my drift. Yeah. And so things are kind of falling apart on the personal level. And I'm seeing a therapist, and I came to a really important point in my life where I needed to make a major decision. And I asked my therapist, George, what should I do? Should I go right? Should I go left? What should I do? What should I do? And rather than giving me some therapeutic advice, he started throwing coins on the table and making marks on a piece of paper. And I'm getting more and more pissed off because, I'm paying him $65 to be a therapist, not a soothsayer. And eventually, he comes up with a number and opens up this book to that chapter number. It was Retreat, is the name of the chapter. So I cursed him out and I stomped out, but I couldn't get away from the word. So I pulled back from a lot of the behaviors, my excessive behaviors and the like. And I asked him what that was all about. It turned out that my therapist, George, was the English language editor for a 72nd generation Daoist master from the Shaolin Temple. The Kung Fu Tai Chi Temple. Now think about that. 72nd generation. That means his wisdom has been handed down, I'm figuring, about 1,400 years. From father to son to father to son, father to son. And so this guy came to Miami, and when I met him, it was like, wow. You ever meet those people who immediately they're just like somebody you want to know, and you want to know everything that's in their head, and you just want to know everything about them. Yep. And so Master Ni taught me Taoism, and he taught me what the path was to becoming a master in life. Because we call him Master Ni. When I asked him once, what's the master mean? And he says, that's mastery of life. And I said, well, what does mastery of life look like? And he said, you want to put out the littlest amount of effort possible, interfere with things the least that you can, but at the same time be more effective and more efficient. You want to accomplish without effort. And it all sounded pretty strange to me. But after 8 years of study, I understood what he was talking about. And he was talking about learning about how to go with the flow in a way that was profound and a way that was wise and the like. And that led me to meditation. And just about the same time, it's kind of funny, just the way things come together. Just about the time I was beginning to really understand what Master Ni was teaching me, I ran into some trouble with my Italian mob friends because his son got arrested and he was demanding things of me that I would not do. And so I decided that the best course of action would be to move to North Carolina, which I did. I went back, I said to Johnny, Johnny, I'm moving to North Carolina. And he said, well, it's good. Sometimes a man has to move on. And we shook and we parted friends. Got to North Carolina, and life was like a blank canvas now. I could rewrite my whole life. And I could rewrite it from a very different perspective. From studying for 8 years under a Taoist master, it was transformational. I wasn't the same person that started with him. So I was attending Buddhist temples and learning more about meditation. And finally, some very esteemed teachers reached out to me and they said, we would like you to take the training to become a teacher. I said, okay. 2 years later, I got certified in insight meditation, started teaching it. In the meantime, I'm still going to court, but now my focus is very different. It wasn't about fame and money. I already had enough money. I mean, Miami was very good to me. And so I just devoted myself to public service, my community, and trying to make a difference in the criminally, charged defendants who came into my care. And I wanted to see if I could change their lives to stop them from the revolving door, of offending and reoffending and resentenced and reoffending and the like. And I got to tell you, Nikki, that some of my greatest prides, I guess I would say some of the greatest things that, really lift my heart is every once in a while, it's still a small town, I'll run into one of my old clients and he'll say, Mr. Martin, the last time I offended was when you represented me. I've never been in trouble since. And that just does my heart good. So that's kind of like the nutshell.
Okay, we got to unpack some of this, man. There's some interesting things to dive into a bit more deeply. So, Janet Reno, I remember her as the Attorney General of the United States. I remember the whole Branch Davidian situation. when in Waco, Texas, when the
Mhm.
FBI was sent in there and there was a bit of a bloodbath.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, there was a stupid thing they did to send those troops in there and start shooting that way. I don't think that was well done, but I thought she handled it with a level of strength and grace and class, which frankly I was shocked at because, you know, she was a Democrat. Most Democrat leaders at that time were, let's face it, idiots. She wasn't. She impressed the heck out of me. What was it like to work with Janet Reno? What
Well,
was she all about?
she was extraordinary. She was as honest. She would be, if she had to buy a car, she would walk into the dealership, write down the number on the sticker, and she would write the check for that amount. She didn't want anybody to say that she got a special deal. If she didn't drive much, she had a driver, and if she had to go to city council meetings, she would make sure the driver paid the meter, put money in the meter.
Wow.
So not just sit there. I mean, she was just like that. She lived in a cabin in Yuppieville, part of Miami, a place called Kendall. And her original parents had come down and they had bought this, they had this like 2-acre slit. And you would go down this main highway through Kendall, Miami, Florida, where there's all stores and cars and high rises. And you'd pass this one block, which was nothing but vegetation. And her cabin was in the middle of that. And she used to invite all the young, every year we had a new class of DAs. So she used to invite them all over to her cabin for an orientation party. And all of the old guys, we would all be shouting, "Hey, Janet, do it, do it, do it." And dang it, she would jump up on the kitchen counter and grab a rafter, and she would swing between the rafters. And she was a big woman, let me tell you. She was like 6'4" and not small. And she would just grab those rafters and swing between it. Everybody in the world that knew Janet Reno loved her.
Yeah, she was built like an Amazon.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, and it was wild. Her tenure as Attorney General was interesting. There's no question about it.
Yeah. She did not believe in the death penalty. She thought that it was on many different levels, yet she prosecuted it and put like 12 people during her tenure on death row because that's the law.
And you got to work with her for 2 years.
I got to work with her for 6 years.
For 6 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So
Yes.
What made you decide to leave public service to become an attorney in private practice?
Well, I think every DA, has that in mind down the road. Some people are career, prosecutors, and they do that. Well, actually, no, you know what happened? I was there, I was pretty happy, and then this law firm came and they wanted to hire me. And so they made me this wonderful offer, and I accepted it, and I left the DA's office. And I got to their office, and when I found out, what big firm life was like, it's all about billing, and it's all about, I'm a trial lawyer. I wasn't an office lawyer, and they wanted me to go back to being, a carry guy. I just didn't want to do that. So I lasted about 3 weeks there, and then the only choice I had was to hang out my shingle.
Okay. So you were hired by a big firm, and then you decided to do your own thing.
Yeah, I just didn't like that big firm atmosphere. The politics, and it wasn't like the DA's office. The DA's office was a lot of camaraderie, and we were all like in it together. And we, being in Miami during those days, we saw a lot of stuff.
I'll bet you did.
I had tried 2 felony trials, jury trials, before I even graduated law school. I must have had 75 jury trials under my belt by the time I left there.
So what happened in Miami to kind of take it away from that cocaine cowboy atmosphere that was there for like a decade plus? What changed things? I'd like to hear it from your perspective as somebody who was there.
Sure. So if you ever saw the movie Scarface,
Sure, of course. I love that movie. I love Miami Vice. I've watched them multiple times each.
Right. So you remember the scene where Pacino, first got in there and he was like in the kind of caged-in area underneath the elevated roadway?
Yep.
So what they're talking about in that situation is the Mariel boat lift. And when Carter was president, he opened up the border and he said to the Cuban families, you can take a boat and go over to Cuba and pick up your relatives. But when they got to Cuba, Castro had his soldiers on the decks and he lined up all of his criminals and his perverts and his mental institution and his schizos, and he forced these people to bring those folks back here. Not only that, but they placed agents between Castro and the Russians. They had agents in Miami that were handing out MAC-10s and submachine guns and pistols to all these nuts who were getting off the boat. So Miami just exploded in a crime wave. And then in that chaos, all of the cartels started to make their great, pathways. The Colombians, they partnered with the Italians and the Haitians to take the stuff to Haiti, and then it would shoot up to New York, where the Italians owned the docks, and they could get it in that way, whereas the Cubans were pretty much in charge of the Florida Straits, and so the Colombians and the Cubans got the stuff to come in through the Everglades and Bimini. Of course, eventually they went and arrested the president of Bimini and scooted him out of there in a daring move. So all of that stuff was going on at the same time. Eventually, piece by piece, all those crazies started to get arrested or killed or whatever, and things, started to, calm down. But, the cartels and the Colombians and everybody is still operating. It's not like it stopped, but it's just more quiet.
That was a pretty wild thing that Castro did. And
yeah, brilliant. Brilliant in creating chaos.
Well, it sounds like Maduro in Venezuela has done the same thing with his criminals. He sent a whole bunch of them out of Venezuela to the United States. These gangs, the Tren de Aragua, I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, and even El Salvador did a bit of the same thing as well. They sent a lot of their criminals up here, and the policies of the Biden administration have brought a lot of those people into the United States. Now, I live in Canada, and even here, the policies of the Trudeau administration, and thank God today, Justin Trudeau officially resigned, and I think we're on our way to having a sane government again, was to take in a whole bunch of criminals. I mean, criminals from South America, criminals from India right now breaking into people's homes. Toronto has been the safest big city in the world for a long time. It's no longer the case. People are having their homes being invaded by these folks. And as someone who has a bit of a background in that, before we get into the main reason why you and I are here to talking, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how a government like a new Canadian government, as an example, or the new Trump administration can do something about this.
If you're asking me my opinion, there was an increase in the amount of people coming across the border initially under the Biden administration. But that's not to say that under the first Trump administration, there were no people coming across the border. There were millions of people coming across the border in the Trump administration. The problem is that the border is so huge and the required resources to control it are so large that it costs too much money. And you have a government that, government is all about figuring out how to allocate limited resources. Money is a limited resource. Are we going to put the money in the border? If we are, we're going to have to take it for somebody else, or we're going to have to print more, which is going to cause inflation, which is going to create more money for everybody else. It's a limited resource. So when you talk about policy decisions, you're really talking about where people prioritize they're going to spend their money. And there are a lot of things that call for money. I mean, if you have kids that aren't being educated, and as a result, they're in inner cities that aren't getting the resources they need, one group of people might say we need to put some of our funding there so that these people have the resources to grow up to be good citizens. Somebody else says, no, we need to put our money here. Or somebody else says we need to give tax breaks to these group of people so that they have more money to invest. I mean, these are all ideas that people have about where we should put our money or give people breaks about the money. So you're talking about priorities here. So I think that it's just hard to talk about the border situation in a vacuum, saying that we can look at that and find what the solution of that is without looking how it affects, the rest of the things. It's a complicated thing. But I would say this, that people that think that the border situation was caused by Biden are correct in part and not correct in part. They're correct in that he changed some policies, and there was a thinking among the Central American folks that those policies were going to give them more access, and so the flow increased. When Trump was separating families, people were scared to come, and so the flow decreased. And so that is true, but it didn't decrease to zero. So there were still millions of people coming across. And then the other thing that you have to think about is many of those people that come across, even in my little town of Burlington, North Carolina, we have thousands of immigrants there that are working as dishwashers in agriculture who are undocumented. And if you take them away, it's going to crash the economy. So, you asked me a very complicated question. You can't look at it. I don't believe you can look at it, as a standalone problem.
Well, you answered a different question than the one that I had in mind. So maybe I wasn't clear. The question I had in mind is what to do, particularly about the criminal elements that have taken advantage of this to come into the States and into Canada. Because what Jimmy Carter allowed the Cubans to do was to basically send a whole bunch of crazy nut jobs into America that caused a massive problem. Right. What Joe Biden has done, never mind his broader border policy, and we can talk about that separately because I think what he did was downright criminal, and Trudeau the same here. Canada never had more than 300,000 people a year coming into our country ever in our history. The last 2 years, we've had 1.2 million people each. We're a country of 35 million people. That's nuts. You can't sustain that. That's freaking crazy. And I'm an immigrant. My family came from Iran. We immigrated to Canada legally. And we waited for 2.5 years before we did it. But what I'm interested in is you're a prosecutor. You were part of dealing with the aftermath of this policy and these crazy people coming in. What can the U.S. government, the Canadian government do to stop the tide of crime and home invasions and transnational criminal gangs being in Canada and the U.S.?
Well, that's simple. You could declare martial law and bring the troops into the streets and make sure everybody has identifications and scan everybody as they're going. Well, no. I mean, I'm being facetious, but when you ask the question, you have to compare it. Now, I'm a defense attorney. And you ask a defense attorney that, what I say is that kind of thinking is the kind of thinking that starts to whittle away at the rights and freedoms of the regular guy. Because if you're starting to find these guys and get them.
The Canadian government will not do that under a new government. And I can guarantee you the American government will not do that. There's no appetite. There's no appetite amongst the supporters of I'm supporting the new government that's going to take over from Trudeau as a Canadian. There's no appetite among people like us to have martial law in the streets. After the lockdowns of COVID and all that crap, we would we would put a stop to that in 2 seconds flat. What is
Well,
realistic to get rid of these
Then
gangs?
tell me why we are accepting the idea that a person is going to be appointed to head up the FBI who says outright that he is going to prosecute all of the people who said badly things about Trump. And he is being appointed and nobody seems to be screaming about it. So I don't know. Don't tell me that the Americans aren't so stupid. I don't know.
I'm telling you 1,000%. I will put money on it. I'll give you 10-1 odds and I'll win.
Then why are they saying
it's not going to happen? There's going to be no martial law. I'm asking you as a prosecutor, how do we get rid of the gangs? Because
I'm answering the question. That's the only way. That's the way. You have to go out with martial force and find them and grab them and lock them up. That's the only way. How else can you do it? Do you have a solution?
Honestly, I don't, but you were there in Miami, right? You were there in Miami. You were part of the
and that's what we did. And that's what we did. One by one, we found these guys and locked them up.
Well, I can get, but you're not going to send 2 divisions of, the 82nd Airborne into the streets of Toronto to do that, right?
Well, Trump says that's what he wants to do. That's what he says he wants to do. Well, I promise you, he himself has said that he wants to use the military to root out the enemy within. Now, you've heard him talk about the enemy within. He wants to use the military to root out the enemy within. Now, he himself said it. Now, if he's not going to do it.
That's not what he meant. I listened to the conversation he had. What he wants to do is he wants to ensure that in situations where they are basically rounding certain folks up, military assets are going to be used in the transportation, in the removal of folks to take them down south. What he's not said, and he will never say because it'll be the end of his presidency within 5 minutes, is he's going to declare martial law. He's going to tell everybody to stay at home, and he's going to send troops into the streets, house to house. I don't believe any American politician is going to do that. After the lockdowns, after the COVID lockdowns, I don't think there's any appetite among the population of my country of Canada or the United States to support that kind of behavior. I can tell you this. I was one of those folks who didn't get jabbed. I was one of those folks who refused to wear masks, and all of that. And I had people in my friends, my family, berate me for that, say you're wrong and bad. And all of them wore the masks, did the jabs, all of that. And they're all telling me, those same people who back then were 100% supportive, that they feel they were misled, they're angry, and they are never, ever going to allow that again. One guy in particular, close friend of mine, called me up and chewed me out for an hour. Like if we weren't that good friends, I would have told him to go F himself. That's how bad it was. Called me later to say, I apologize, I was wrong. I'm not going to do this. And I'm telling you, in our country, there's zero appetite for, police state military tactics of everyone staying in their homes and people going into their houses.
Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
Have you looked at the resumes of the people that he wants to put in charge of our national defense?
You and I are going to disagree. You and I are going to agree to disagree because my background is political science.
How do you look
at this? You have a legal
business?
background. I have a background. I went to Georgetown University. I studied political science. I studied geopolitics, international policy. Politics is my jam, and I happen to be very right of center. I support everything Donald Trump is doing in the United States. I frankly think we need something similar in Canada, which is why I'm glad that I did not want to get into a political discussion with you. I just wanted to hear from a prosecutor. What did you guys do to grab the crazy people off the streets? Because right now in my home city, I got 2 teenage boys and I'm scared. I want to know what we can do to get the crazies off our streets. Buddy of mine told me some dude was waiting outside of his condo building, got in through the back door, went upstairs directly to his room with a cable and tried to choke him. And this is like a high security condo building in Toronto. Toronto, prior to 5 years ago, we'd never had more than 35 murders in a year. That gun crime was non-existent. Right now, it sounds like New York in the 70s. That's all I was asking you for. I wanted to see what we could do here in my country to do that, because I happen to have some connections with certain people that are going to get into power, and I'd like to be able to make my views heard. And I want to know what you did. That's the only discussion I wanted to have.
No, you didn't ask me. You didn't ask me what we did. You asked me what we should do.
Yeah, but I asked you based on you being a prosecutor who did it.
The answer to your question is we have to arrest them and prosecute them and put them in jail.
I agree with that 100%. I agree with that.
What else is there?
Nothing. Right now in Canada, the bail laws that Justin Trudeau set into place are people get out as soon as they get arrested. They get out the very next day. I mean, these guys have no fear of the law, no fear of actually paying for their crimes. That's a big part of what's going on here. And I want to see that change. I love my city. I love where I've lived. I don't want to leave. But if it doesn't get better, I might have to. That's the crazy part. So let's move on. So you got into the world of being a Daoist student, a mentee. What drew you to that? What made you decide this was a good place for you to spend the second half of your life?
So my folks came over from Europe. My dad was Hungarian royalty, left Hungary at the Bolshevik Revolution. When the Bolsheviks came into Hungary, pretty much massacred all of his relatives and family. So I don't really have any ancestors. My mom was Roma Gypsy, and as we know, every group in the world slaughtered the Romas. So when they came to America to find the American dream, they didn't have God and religion as a particular conversation in the home. I'm not saying that they were anti-God or atheist, but they just had some difficulty with the idea of a merciful God after what they experienced and the pain that they had experienced. So it didn't grow up with that. So my dad, however, was a very virtuous man, and he was a very meticulous man, Eastern European, kind of that Germanic, doing things correctly and doing a job right. Those were his values. If you're going to do something, do it right. If you say you're going to do something, do it, or say that you can't do it. And he was very virtuous about those things. So I had a good set of values. I just didn't have any kind of system that I was given. So when I was, hanging out with these guys in Miami, like I say, my wife was alcoholic. I was doing a lot of cocaine. My daughter was anorexic. My poor son was kind of like the lost kid. My wife was personal. I mean, making a lot of money, but personal life falling apart. So I'm seeing a therapist, and it turns out the therapist, led me into finding out about Master Ni. And when I asked him what Taoism was, if you know anything about Taoism, or if you don't, I'll tell you, it is a system. Well, Tao means the way. It just means the way. And the main book of Taoism is called the Tao Te Ching, which means the classical book of the way of virtue. And it is basically a handbook, like an owner's manual of how to live life. And it has some principles, that guide you to how to live a life that's happy, joyful, effortless, effective, and efficient. Now, who doesn't want that?
Sure.
And you have to believe in God. I didn't have to believe in angels or devils or hell or heaven. It's not part of the philosophy. So since I wasn't being asked to believe anything that I didn't grow up with, and that was hard for me to believe, I took to it because finally somebody told me how to live right. And everything I heard about it and everything I did and every practice I practiced brought me more and more to a sense of this is how I want to live my life.
I believe that God puts people together at particular times. Mm-hmm. however way, maybe you believe that, maybe you don't. But this morning, 10 minutes before you and I got on, I was reading a book about the 1956 Hungarian uprising. Some of the heroes of that time. And I read about the forces of darkness taking some of these young men and women and basically stringing them up. And there was one story of one man who was a soccer star, because in the 50s, Hungary had the greatest soccer players in the world. The Dancing Magyars. In 1954, they were supposed to be world champions, and I don't know how the heck the Germans beat them, because they were so much better than the Germans, but they did. And there was a story of one young man, and I forget his name, and he was a star on that team. And, you know, they caught him for subversive activity, and he was hanged by the authorities. And what was interesting is this was recounted that he asked his jailers, his guards, if he'd be allowed to pray before they hung him. And they angrily told him, no, you won't be allowed to pray. But it was the case of a young man who was idealistic and believed in a better world. And then you're telling me that your family, Hungarian royalty, fled after the Bolshevik Revolution. I just thought, wow, that was
right.
That was
of course, that was
some way.
you're talking 1912 there, though.
Okay.
The original Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, when Russia
got it.
And then they invaded Hungary, and Hungary became communist for a while, and then it became democratic again. And it was communist, and then the revolution was a revolt against the communism in 54.
Yep.
And that's when the Russians sent the tanks in.
Yeah.
But the Hungarians are quite a people.
They sure are. It's amazing that you shared that with me 10 minutes before you and I started speaking. That's what I was reading about.
Isn't that something?
It really is. So, So you were looking for a path. You were going through a period in your life where you were making a lot of money, but your personal life was a mess.
A mess.
So you decided at that point to learn for yourself, and then there came a time where you decided you needed to give this away to other people. What brought you to that point? Why was that?
Well, so it just so happens that as I was really beginning to gain traction with some of the deeper aspects of Master Ni's teaching, my client Johnny, his son got arrested, and up until then we had a deal that I wasn't going to do anything unethical and I wasn't going to do anything illegal. And Johnny felt that that was in his best interest as well, because he needed a lawyer that was trusted by the court. My word was gold in the courts. And so that worked to his advantage. So it was all good until his son got arrested. And then he demanded me to do things that I refused to do. So that's why I wound up moving to North Carolina. I was kind of in a pickle, because even if he hired another lawyer, I would be ethically bound to report another lawyer that was doing unethical things. So I told Johnny I was moving to North Carolina. He shook my hand. He said we could part friends, and we never heard from him again. I moved to North Carolina. I'm telling you this because when I got to North Carolina, it was like I totally, put my past behind me, and I had this brand new blank canvas to rewrite my life. Sure. And when I got there, I was already a changed person. I got there in early 90s, and I went to work for a small town DA's office, start my career all over again. I did that for a few years, and then went out in private practice. I speak Spanish, and so I was representing all the Latinos. And I decided that I wasn't going to take any more paying clients, only court-appointed clients, representing what, Jesus would refer to as the least of these, the poor people.
Sure.
Because, I looked around, and as a prosecutor, I could see there were a lot of attorneys who were just, taking those cases to make the money, and they didn't give a flying crap about their clients. And I thought that they needed to have somebody who did. So I did that, and then I felt like I wanted to be more holistic, to be more full-bodied with them, to take care of them, not just their legal case. I went back and got a master's in social work. And then from that point on,
That's amazing.
Yeah, I did. When in the year 2000, I went back, closed my office, went back 2 years, got a master's in social work. And then I worked with them and, started making a difference. And then when I got to be certified as a meditation teacher, I started teaching meditation, privately in jails and churches, wherever I could. And finally, my university, now I retired in 2015 from the courts. But then Elon University, which is right here in my county, picked me up to teach undergraduates law. And I kept asking them, could I teach them meditation? And finally, a couple of years ago, the universe said, we would like you to do that. So now I'm teaching for college credit. I'm teaching my meditation courses to college students. And I got to tell you, it just is one of the most exciting things I could ever imagine doing.
That's pretty darn awesome. I mean, I think they should be teaching meditation, not just at college levels, but as early as kindergarten.
Oh, yeah. No, sometimes I get a class from the foster and juvenile justice systems. Yes. Kids that are in foster care, kids that are in trouble, there's 14, 12. I get a class of those like maybe every 3 or 4 months. I do pro bono, I do it for free. And those kids are incredible. They picked it up so fast, much quicker than the adults. And I had one kid come to me, so the way it works is I give them an app and they meet with me 1.5 hours a week, and we talk about some new techniques and what was in your way last week and what's next week look like. It's kind of like a group therapy session. But then I give them the app, and they've got guided meditations on the app, and they got a log, and they log their feelings about it, and then I get the logs and I respond to it. So every day they have contact with me through the app every single day. And 5 weeks of having a back and forth with somebody that's giving you a little bit of wisdom and a couple of tips and tricks about life here and there can make a huge difference in their lives. And so this one kid said, I was out on the playground and my friend Jimmy pushed me down, and it made me really mad. And I got up and I was going to hit him, but then I went over to the bench and I did my breathing. And then, once I started doing my breathing, I thought that if I go over there and if I hit him, then we'll never, ever be friends again. So I let it go. 12-year-old kid in the foster system.
That's awesome.
What a freaking difference it makes.
That's totally awesome. Our mutual friend Raymond is good friends with Dr. Nito Kubain, who's the president of High Point University in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. You ought to reach out to Raymond and ask him to make an introduction for you. I had Nito on my podcast a while ago. I know Nito, but I'm not as close to him as Raymond is. You might want to propose doing this. I think Nito would be very receptive to it.
That would be, with an introduction, it would be great. Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you for that.
To introduce you to Dr. Nito Kubain, the president of High Point University. Tell him I said that I thought Nito would be open to having you have a conversation with him about introducing meditation as a 4-credit course into High Point.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And we can do it online. It can be done easily online. Because, the digital infrastructure that was created at Duke University lends itself to that. You could have a Zoom meeting 1 hour a week, and then this app that Duke University created is just phenomenal. I mean, just to give you an example, you do like a 10-minute meditation. So there's the guided meditations that say it's taking you through a body scan. And then at the end of the body scan, a little log comes up, and you might say, oh, I really hated this because I couldn't pay attention. There was a dog barking, and the only thing I felt in my body was my cheeks got real flushed, and then the bell rang, and I didn't meditate at all. They might say that in their log. My mind was racing and everything else. So that comes to me in the morning. And then by the time they do their next session that day, they have a feedback from me, which says something like, whoa, you think that it was worthless, but this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that you noticed your cheeks were flushed. I'm seeing that you noticed that, the dog was able to distract you, and you noticed what being distracted feels like. You also noticed that time seemed to compress because all of a sudden the bell rang. So look at all of the stuff that you noticed, and that's all data for you to be able to be aware of how your mind and body works. And they get something like that every single day. So it's highly effective.
Meditation is like a game changer, man. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. Your background is very, very interesting, Bob. I think you ought to be on more and more podcasts. And I don't know if you're using this just to spread the message. I don't know if you're trying to get people to sign up for your meditation programs, but this is a good idea that you're going on shows, and I'd be happy to chat with you offline. What I'm an authority in is podcast guesting, in leveraging podcast guesting to generate more monetization, clients, followers, that sort of thing. Raymond was instrumental in me bringing that out to people and teaching it to people. I taught it to a bunch of his clients back in the day, but I've been on 700 shows in 2.5 years.
God.
Yeah. So yeah, it is. Taught me a thing or two. And I like teaching good people like yourself how to leverage podcasting. And, again, love Trump or hate him, he used podcast guesting to get himself elected. It was very smart as a strategy. And why it works is because you're going where the people are. And today people are listening to podcasts, watching podcasts. So I think it's smart for you to be on my show and to go on Raymond's show and a ton of other shows to get, not just get the word out, but get actual engagement, buyers, listeners, you name it.
I'd love to have that conversation with you.
Yeah, let's chat after the show. But please make sure you reach out to Raymond and ask for Nido, Nido Cubain, Quebein, Nido Cubain, president of High Point University in High Point, North Carolina.
What was the name of Raymond's podcast? Do you remember?
Respark Your Life.
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
Respark Your Life.
Mm-hmm.
Raymond loved you. I mean, like I tell you, he personally reached out to me to say, you need to have this man on. He's amazing. And he was right. He's always right whenever he gives me a good recommendation that way. And I'm glad that you came on the show today. What you have to say is valuable and it's important. So if people want to work with you, where do we send them?
awiseandhappylife.com.
A Wise and Happy Life?
Yeah.
awiseandhappylife.com. We're going to make sure that's in the show notes. So, Bob, we wrap up every show by asking you, our guest expert, what are your top 3 expert action steps? These are your 3 best bullet point pieces of advice for my listener. And keep in mind, most of my listeners are entrepreneurs, businessmen and businesswomen who are looking to make a difference, and also they're looking to grow their businesses. What's your best 3 pieces of advice?
To entrepreneurs. Have a nice pet. I'm just kidding.
I love that.
I love my dogs. And they make all the difference in the world. I can come back from the worst day in the world and my dogs come up and lick me. It's all good. No, seriously. Love yourself enough to give yourself a few minutes during the day. Take care of yourself. The old expression, if mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy.
Yep.
It goes for guys too.
Oh, yeah.
If you ain't happy when you go into work and you got to be a supervisor, you got to manage, you got to take care of your people and your team, and you ain't happy, they ain't going to be happy. And that's 1. 2, Brain science and the ancient arts both teach us you cannot suppress negative thinking, but you can increase positive thinking to become balanced. So, curate your environment. Put things around you that make you happy. You have a responsibility to awe and beauty. Make sure that you experience those things in your life. Without it, the world is going to pull the right side of your negative fight, flight, sympathetic nervous system down into a rabbit hole. You gotta intentionally balance it out. And empathetic leadership is not an oxymoron.
So, Bob, thanks for coming on the show. It's been a lot of fun having this conversation with you.
Yeah.
And
We gotta, you know what we gotta do? We gotta make a little pinky bet, right? We come back 6 months from now and we see whether your prediction was more accurate or mine was. We'll see.
We'll see. We'll definitely see.
We'll see. We'll see.
I can tell you this: in the entrepreneurial world, there's a whole ton of optimism right now.
I understand
very strongly, and I do as well, that the economy is gonna be uplifted in the next 4 years. They believe very strongly that certainly 2025, there's a lot of opportunity that's available. I can tell you this for myself as a Canadian, it really was wonderful to see that crazy policies around the economy and frankly around children, because, you know, growing up, one of my best friends, I had two men were my best friends. They were my co-best friends. One of them's an Italian guy, traditional family, all that jazz, and he's still around and he's a great guy. The other one was a South African fellow, supermodel handsome, because he actually used to be a supermodel. And he came out to me as gay, several years into our friendship. And I kind of knew he was gay, even though he didn't say anything to me very early on into our friendship. He was a really good dude, you know what I mean? And I didn't really care. But this was like, the late 80s, early 90s. And then in the early 90s, in the late 90s, he came out to me 10 years in. And he said, "You probably figured out by now that I'm gay, right?" And I go, yeah, I know you're gay. He said, "I just want to know, because, you're from Iran, right? Do you have an issue with that?" I said, "No, man, I don't have an issue with that. Good for you. God bless you. All of that stuff. You just say, I know there's a lot of girls that have an issue with it because you're a really good looking dude and they're just going to be upset by that. But no, I don't have an issue with it." And he killed himself because he liked girls too. He liked girls. He liked guys. He was more gay but he tried to go be with a girl, and he just messed him up, and he killed himself. And I remember the day he killed himself. I had a sense something was wrong. I didn't know what, but I had a sense something was wrong, and I called him. And he didn't answer, and he always answered the phone when I called. So I was just I called the girl that he was seeing at the time, right? Because he was a girlfriend, and she told me he killed himself, and I was really upset. And thinking about it still pisses me off and upsets me, because the world is a lesser place because this man is not in it. And when I got into business, I used to be a personal trainer. That was, the first kind of being in business for myself career that I had. And my biggest and best client was a gay lawyer, and he was a good dude. And I was married at the time, and him and his dude and my woman, we went out for dinner several times, and I had a business partner who was gay. So I've lived around gay people being in Canada a lot and had a lot of them in my life. I'm not somebody who hasn't had that. And I was one of the earliest people to say, hey, look, anybody they want to get married, let them get married. And I tell my gay buddies, I think you're crazy to want to get married. Best thing about being gay is you can use the excuse that the crazy straight people don't want to let you get married. But, you know, they're all against it. But when they started going after little kids to say, hey, let little kids decide their sexuality, their sexual identity, like 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds. I mean, I remember I put on my mom's makeup when I was a kid. You know what I mean? I sure as hell wouldn't have wanted somebody to tell me, hey, it's time to snip off your Johnson over this. You know what I mean? That sort of thing I got an issue with. I got a massive, massive issue with. And in our country, the Trudeau government passed some laws saying that if somebody had a certain gender identity, you were not allowed to use different pronouns. Otherwise, you'd go to jail for 5 years for that. I had a problem with that as well. But other than that, I've got a very live and let live attitude. And that's the greatest thing about living in the free West is that people can be whoever they want to be, as long as our government is not trying to force us to accept something that we don't want to accept. I think that's a big issue. And on that note, I'll say this: I am very hopeful that 2025 will be a good year in the United States, in Canada. Very hopeful that in my country, crime rates are going to go down now that Trudeau is out, because this has been a wonderful city to live in. Never heard about carjackings or home invasions or anything like that, and I would like to see that sort of thing disappear from the news. I'd like it to be a sad, bizarre chapter in Canadian history that's never going to be repeated. There we go. Bob Martin, God bless you. Thank you for coming today. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Be well.
You too.
This episode has been brought to you by eCircleAcademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.